In this video, I'm going to be reviewing 5 mystery games revolving around jewelry heists. The games are the Jewellery Heist, Case 1 from Cold Case Investigation Unit. We're also going to be looking at 2 cases from the Sherlock Files. The Sherlock Files is a card-based mystery game. One case is called 13 Hostages. It's from this set called Curious Capers. And another case from the Sherlock Files is called FRIDA. That case revolves around the theft of this necklace. There are 2 other games here. One is End of the Line in the Cold Case series, and the other is Hidden Games Crime Scene, the Midnight Crown, the UK edition. I have reviewed these 2 games in the past in much greater depth than I'll be doing here. If you are interested in more information on those, you can check out my full review of the Cold Case series and check out my review of some mystery games set in the art world if you want to see more material from the Midnight Crown. In each of these games, you will be using deductive logic to try to solve the mystery. Obviously, there is a whodunit element. In some cases, you're going to be looking at a howdunnit element as well. Each game will take you at least 1 hour. You're probably looking at 2 to 3 hours for this case. Because of the way they've laid out the evidence here, there's a possibility that you are going to find out clear evidence of whodunit fairly quickly, but there'll still be a lot of material for you to sort through if you wish to go on this jewelry heist case. The Hidden Games case is probably going to take you at least 2 hours. It would probably take you about 90 minutes to go through this Cold Case End of the Line game. The Sherlock Files games, on the box, it will tell you about an hour. For me, it's closer to 90 minutes when I play with one partner. With a larger group, you'd probably get through it more quickly. The Sherlock Files games can be played in 1-player mode. I only have the experience of playing it in a 2-player mode. Each of the other cases I completed by myself. I would recommend a small group for the Cold Case games as they are somewhat easy. So if you have a big group, some of you aren't going to have the experience of solving things just because 1 or 2 people will probably take over and solve things. The Hidden Games case, I played it solo, but I think it's a really good game to play with others because it has some interactive multimedia elements. There's things like phone calls where the game will call you mid-game and tell you of some plot twist that happens. I think it's probably a fun one you could experience with a group. One aspect that might appeal to people about these jewelry heist games is some people don't want to play a murder mystery with their kids. In that case, I should warn you that there are murders in this game. There's actually 2 dead bodies by the end of the game. However, the jewelry heist is essentially a non-violent game. There is one character who has a history as something of a serial stalker. The Hidden Games Midnight Crown game is a completely non-violent game. There is no violence in this FRIDA game, which is in the Sherlock Files Sinister Secrets box. However, the other cases in this box are murder mysteries. If you're worried about that kind of content, just play this one with your kids and play the others by yourself. There is some violence in the other Sherlock Files game, which is found in Curious Capers. I have played one other game from this set, and that game is a lot darker in tone than this one. Prior to my first experience playing a jewelry heist mystery game, I had played some murder mystery games, so my expectation coming into this genre was that the games would be somewhat similar. The point that I looked forward to in playing these games was finding out not just the whodunit, but the howdunnit. Whenever you watch a jewelry heist mystery movie, there is some interesting mechanism that the criminals use in order to steal the jewels. I have to say, I was a little disappointed with this particular aspect when it came to the first 2 games I played. The jewelry heist, there's really nothing interesting about the way the crime was carried out. And I have to say the same goes for the Hidden Games Midnight Crown. There is a lot to like about the Hidden Games Midnight Crown game. However, the details relating to the theft aren't that interesting. In this case, the museum where the jewels are kept is notorious for being weak in terms of security. The criminal simply waited till people were doing another thing in another room just went in and stole them. And that's as simple as that. One thing that comes to mind with film when thinking about jewelry heist movies that don't offer an interesting way in which the jewels were stolen, the film that comes to mind is Reservoir Dogs. Now, of all the jewelry heist movies, it's probably my favorite. So one question to ponder over is, can you have a good jewelry heist game if the jewelry heist itself isn't that interesting? Of the other three games here, there are more interesting methods used in stealing the crime. It's particularly notable that this game, FRIDA, has a very similar plot line to the Cold Case Investigation Unit game, but FRIDA offers a much more interesting way in which the criminal was able to steal the jewels. In this Sherlock Files card game, we do have an interesting method that the criminal was able to use in order to steal this necklace. What made it particularly satisfying for me in comparison to this game here, the Jewellery Heist, is that the basic setup for the case is the same. In this case, we have an actress who was loaned this jewel for an award ceremony. It is meant to be kept in a lockbox in a hotel, and it goes missing. This is very similar to the premise for the jewelry heist. We have an actress who is returning to her hotel, puts the jewels in her lockbox. Moments later, the security guard opens the box and it has vanished. So one of the biggest shortcomings for me in this game is a lack of an effort in providing an imaginative or interesting way in which the criminal was able to commit the crime. Just from reading the initial setup and looking at things like the logs showing when the lockbox was opened and so on, it felt almost like you're starting out with a he said, she said between a security guard and an actress. I am getting into spoilers a little bit here, but there are other suspects within the game, but we're never really presented with any evidence that would suggest that these suspects would have been able to steal this jewel. As this is the first case in the Cold Case Investigation Unit series, it is the easiest of their cases. Usually when companies begin making these games, they start out with an easier game and then they up the difficulty level. Personally, I wouldn't recommend this one as a beginner case. I think other cases in the Cold Case series are better versions of beginner games. I particularly recommend checking out my Cold Case video series if you want more information on which ones I like the most. The unique selling point of the Cold Case Investigation Unit series of games is that they were written by a former police detective. I believe her name is Catherine Thompson. She was a police officer in Leicester in England. She worked for the domestic violence unit there. She quit due to trauma. From a customer's perspective, you probably anticipate in a game written by a police officer that it's going to have a heightened sense of realism. I would say that this one came across as somewhat cartoony. The actress character is very much of the diva behavior set and comes across very negatively in an almost cartoonish sort of way here. Having experienced a lot of trauma in her work, the writer of the case probably wanted to present a situation that was somewhat far away from the types of crimes she was dealing with in her previous occupation. From a selfish consumer perspective, I would kind of like a police detective to show more gritty, realistic crimes. I preferred game number 2 and game number 3 in this series, with number 2 being my favorite. What would be another weakness of having a police detective as the designer of the game? One of those is going to be graphic design. It's the graphic design of a police officer. The materials aren't as appealing to look at as the other games. This game is a cold case style document dump game. You're going to get a lot of documents. It's very similar to what you would expect to get in a cold case game here or the Hidden Games Midnight Crown. And I've picked out a few documents from each of these cases just to compare the levels of design. Here's how the Cold Case Investigation Unit game presents the jewels and some of the documents related to the jewels here. We get a picture. You can see from the left side of the person's neck that this jewel appears to be a little bit faulty. It's not the same quality of the jewel that's presented here. It's probably something from the family collection of the author. You get an insurance document here. This one's partially in color. So we can compare that presentation with how the Hidden Games case presents its jewels. Not the strongest aspect of the Hidden Games case, does look a little bit photoshoppy, looks a little bit cartoonish. Here's how the game's jewels are presented in Cold Case End of the Line. So this picture's stapled on and we get a police laboratory assessment of some jewels that were found at a crime scene. The next design comparison I want to make is with the layout of text message threads. The way it's presented in the Cold Case Investigation Unit is probably quite realistic in that it's presented as a chart with incoming and outgoing calls. Although it is realistic, it's probably not something that's very appealing. I much prefer the layout used by the Hidden Games. Here's an example of an email thread. You get examples of what it would look like if you were sitting at your computer reading this. Here's an example of a chat thread, and there's a little police note attached saying that this was found on a public computer, and it gives an address, and then there's a map provided within the game. You could look at which building this was found in, and that's going to help you make conclusions and make connections with other evidence that will appear in the game. Here is an example of how the Hidden Games shows a chat thread. You'll notice there's no name listed in the conversation, and part of what you'll be doing when playing the Hidden Games is trying to match this sort of evidence to the different characters within the game. I would say that the Hidden Games does trade a little bit of realism for a little bit of fun, a little bit of having to do certain things, having to find an identity for this person. These are things that you probably wouldn't do if you actually joined an investigation. Cold Case End of the Line takes place in 1960s and later in the 1980s. The premise of this End of the Line cold case is that there was a jewelry heist that went wrong in the 1960s. It left one person dead. The jewels that were stolen were never recovered. The killer was released from prison after about 20 years. While he was on day release from prison, he was killed while trying to recover the jewels that he had hidden 20 years earlier. As it's set across the 60s and the 80s, there's no chat thread, email thread for me to show you. One piece of evidence that I thought was fantastic is this layout of the crime site. This is where the initial murder took place. And I find this piece of evidence really evocative. You can use this along with the witness testimony to make your own prediction of what took place. I like how you've got little details here, like I think it says this chair was overturned and this chair was overturned. You can see the position of a skylight and how it relates to the desks within the room. And as I said, along with the other witness testimony, you're going to be able to put together a pretty accurate depiction of what happened, and that will help you answer some of the game's questions. Of course, the other aspect of the game is going to be to figure out the murder mystery that occurred in the 1980s as well. So this jewelry heist aspect of the game, I think, was depicted very well. I did have an issue with one of the witness testimonies in the game. I thought it was very weak, and I went into more detail about it in the other cold case video. So shoot over to that one if you want to see more about that. If you haven't heard of the Sherlock Files before, this is a mystery card game. It does use deductive logic, but it's also going to use a few other skills. One of them is going to be memory. You're allowed to throw away cards, or you can reveal cards for group discussion. If you do throw away a card, you're not going to be able to discuss that card with your partner until the very end of the case, when all of your cards have either been revealed or thrown away. The game has a nice scoring system. There is no penalty for revealing cards that are useful in solving the case. You're asked 10 questions at the end of the game, and you won't know the 10 questions until you get to the very end of the game. They're 10 multiple choice questions. However, going into the game, you obviously know you're going to be asked whodunit. Can probably predict a few other questions right at the beginning of the game. Maybe how did they do it or why, this kind of thing. But there are other things that are going to come up during the game that you might not know you're going to be questioned on. So you do have to try to retain some of the information that you've thrown away. If you do share a card with your partners that turns out to be unimportant to solving the case, you get a 1-point penalty. I usually play this game with a group of 2. In my experience, I can typically answer 8 to 9 questions correctly. However, I tend to have a few unnecessary cards left on the table, so my ultimate score ends up being somewhat middling. This does seem to be a game where the more players you have, the higher your group's going to score, just because early on in the game, there's going to be more cards available. One of you is going to be more likely to have a card that is clearly going to be important in solving this mystery. Getting those sorts of cards out early will help you. And because you have more players in a group, you're going to be more confident that you can remember some information that you discard. The downside of playing with a big group is that you're going to lose some of the context. I found the time I played this game with 4, there were certain areas of the game, certain questions that I had not seen any information related to. And it was just 1 or 2 other players that were like, oh yeah, we saw this and they saw that, so the answer is this. So in that sense, I felt like a lot of context was missing, whereas I feel like in a 2-player game, I'm still getting a lot of the game's context, even though some of the information is being withheld. I feel like the Sherlock Files cases tend to fall into one of 2 types. In one type, there is a feeling that when you're playing the game, you are frequently making progress. You're frequently finding information that is of use and able to help you build your case as to what happened. The other type of case, it's a little bit more subtle. The information you receive tends to be a lot of background information. It may not point directly to the answer you're looking for within the case. Of these 2 cases, 13 Hostages from Curious Capers, this mystery was one in which it felt like you are progressing a lot. This one, FRIDA, it was more subtle. These cases where you have that feeling of you're progressing a lot, I think are more fun. These types of cases where it's a little bit more subtle, I would say there's more tension in playing the game. So it depends what kind of experience you want. If you just want to have more fun, be able to throw out different ideas, I would recommend 13 Hostages. If you're just interested in something that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat and really make you think through things, you might prefer FRIDA. I enjoyed both of these games. They aren't amongst the best Sherlock Files cases that I've played, but they are good cases. This is the very first card in the 13 Hostages game. You might notice there's some bullet holes in the wall. It looks like there's a lot of broken glass on the floor. Some jewels appear to be missing, but others appear to have been left behind. And I'll read out the introduction to the 13 Hostages case. One thing you might think when you hear this introduction is, I think I've seen a movie that's similar to this, and there is one aspect to this story that is quite similar to a Denzel Washington movie from 20 or so years ago. There are other parts to this mystery that are original. We've got 2 people talking, Alpha and Bravo. 1204. Tactical unit ready to go into the Golden Palace, a jeweller's which was raided by armed robbers at 900 hours. We think there are 13 remaining hostages, but we have no intel on the number of robbers. We're going in. Keep the perimeter secure. No one gets in or out. Alpha Squad, you are a go to enter. The perimeter is secured. This place is ransacked. No sign of any hostiles. What about the hostages? Zone 1 is clear. No hostages and no robbers. Be careful, Alpha. They could be waiting to ambush you. Bravo Squad, we have found 4 hostages tied and hooded. No sign of any assailants. No one gets in or out of this perimeter until the suspects are apprehended. 4 more hostages found. Still no sign of the robbers? Negative. The final 5 hostages have been found. All 13 hostages are now accounted for. Where are the hostiles? They're not in the store. Has anyone exited the building? Negative. Where the bloody hell are they? And where did they stash the jewels? So maybe you have a sense of part of where this story is going if you've seen that Denzel Washington movie I mentioned. An interesting aspect of this 13 hostages introduction is we don't actually know the location that this game is taking place. Depending on which cards you receive and which cards your partners share with you, you might not actually realize where this game is taking place until somewhat late in the game. And for me, that was kind of a twist, because once I understood that, it really changed the way I viewed certain pieces of evidence. The FRIDA game, however, is set in Madrid, and we're told that up front, and really the location doesn't play any role. Let's have a look at the first card you will see after the introduction is read out. So here's the first card. We can see this is Josephine's room. The lockbox is open, and of course there's nothing in there. So you can probably guess what this introduction is going to go over. FRIDA, Madrid, February 24th, 2020. This year's Leonardo Awards featured a special appearance from Josephine Pioneer, the beautiful leading lady of the film Far From Love. Not only did Josephine's movie steal the show last night, winning 4 awards, but Josephine herself was a sight to behold. The actress had received permission to wear the famous FRIDA necklace to the event, a one-of-a-kind piece designed by the renowned jewellery brand Maryland Company. This morning, a representative from Maryland Company and 2 security guards entered the hotel to retrieve the necklace. However, when they opened Josephine Pioneer's safe box, they discovered in horror that it was empty. So where's the FRIDA necklace? Let's talk about the hint systems for each case. The Hidden Games hint system is very granular in that you have a series of hints. The first hints you'll look at will just nudge you in the right direction. And if you're still unable to solve things, you can go further and look at more explicit details. Cold case games do not have a hint system. If you get to the end of the game and you answer one of the 4 or 5 questions incorrectly, they will encourage you to review certain documents, and by reviewing certain documents it should nudge you, or you should have the aha moment of like, oh, okay, it's this line here or it's this picture here that has the information that I need. The cold case investigation unit's hint system is quite poor in that it just asks you some random questions that you should think about. There's nowhere to get information specifically related to the problem you're having trouble dealing with. The Sherlock Files games are unique in that the game itself kind of adapts to the players. If you feel like you don't have enough information, you're going to be more likely to share information with your partner. But if you are confident, you're going to be more likely to conceal the information to your partner to increase your chances of getting more points. Of course, if you do get to the end of the Sherlock Files game and you answer all of the questions and you really are lacking in confidence that you've been able to put things together, then I would say take all those cards you threw away and start sharing them with your partner. You must have missed something somewhere. If you've played any of these, give me your thoughts on which you think is better. My personal pick here would be the Hidden Games Midnight Crown. I think it's a very engaging multimedia experience. There's a lot for you, and if you play with partners, there'll be a lot for them to do, to put together and solve this mystery. Next up, the 2 cases here. I have played 2 of the 3 cases in this Curious Capers set, and so far I would say that this is the best set I've played of the Sherlock Files. I haven't played the 3rd case yet. I'm hoping that's going to be a good one. If you are interested in playing one of these Sherlock Files sets, this one might be the best one for you to get. Once I've played all of them, I'll probably do a review ranking each set. I've only played the Frida necklace case out of this Sherlock Files set. I hope to play the others fairly soon in the future. I would rate Cold Case End of the Line as a more enjoyable experience than the Jewellery Heist. For me, the Jewellery Heist's main issues were the lack of an interesting crime mechanic, the narrative flow of the game as far as the order in which you see the materials when you open the envelope sometimes feels very jarring. I do feel like so far I have been a little bit unfair to this game, as there are some funny moments. I think the writing of the message dialogues were good. At the end of the game, when you enter the HOWDUNNIT, you get a nice little epilogue for each character.